what are the behavioral tools that one can start to think about in terms of ways to modulate these, basically the way that DNA is being expressed and functioning? In other words, what are the sorts of things that people can do to improve the sirtuin pathway? And I realize that there are caveats. We can't go directly from a behavior to sirtuins, but in the general theme, what can people do? What do you do?
Right. Well, we know that aerobic exercise in mice and rats raises their NAD levels, and their levels of SIRT, one of the genes goes up, two actually, number 1 and number 3. What we don't know yet is what type of exercise is optimal to get them to change. We will learn. We're doing work. Now it's revealed that we're doing work with the military in the US to try and understand that kind of thing. And I'll always tell you and the public when I don't know something, I'm not going to extrapolate. But what do? I base my exercise on the scientific literature, which has shown that maintaining muscle mass is very important for a number of reasons. The two main ones are you want to maintain your hormone levels. I'm an older male, losing my testosterone and muscle mass over time. And by exercising, I will maintain that and have. In fact, I probably haven't had a body like this since I was 20. So that's one of the benefits of having this lifestyle.
There are data in humans that show that there are some males in their 80s and 90s where their testosterone is equivalent to the average of 25 and 30-year-olds. Really impressive studies. This idea that testosterone goes down with age, it might be the trend, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite.
Right. I believe in naturally increasing and maintaining these hormone levels. And I've been measuring them for a long time. And I could see, for me, my testosterone levels were going down.
And then you got tenure and they went back up again.
I actually became complacent and it was the worst. Actually, my age changed in the wrong direction after that because I was relaxed.
Interesting.
And not worried about the future. But then I got serious and I actually, according to the Inside Tracker algorithm, got my age down from 58 to 31 in a matter of months. So that was a big drop. And I've been getting steadily younger over the last 10 years, according to that measurement, the blood tests.
What about estrogen? Because women are different in the sense that they do, the number of eggs and the ovaries change over time, right? Do you think that they can maintain estrogen levels over longer periods of time using some of these same protocols?
If you take a mouse and put it on fasting or caloric restriction for up until the point where it should be infertile, so that's about it, at a year of age, a mouse gets infertile, female mouse.
Due to fasting? Or no, due to simply to aging?
Due to aging.
Okay.
Due to aging. The fasting, it's not an extreme fast, it's just less calories.
Got it.
Then you put them back on a regular food and they become fertile again for many, many months afterwards. So the effect on slowing down aging is also on the reproductive system.
Interesting.
What I think is really interesting is that what we're learning from work that you and your colleagues have done, and in my lab as well, is that the body has remarkable powers of healing and recovering from illness and injury. And what we once thought was a one-way street and you just can't repair, you can't get over these diseases, you can reset the system. And the body can really get rejuvenated in ways that in the future we'll wonder, why didn't we work on this earlier? The future of humanity is more like us walking around like Deadpool. We'll probably be cleaner and we won't smell as badly, but Deadpool, if you don't know, can get injured and just recover. It's very hard to injure this guy. And we're going to be the same. There are many species, you cut off the limb grows back.
Salamanders
Yeah. We are now learning how to tap into that system. And in part, what we're doing is reversing the age of those cells and telling them how to read the genes correctly again, reversing the age of that epigenome. And when you do that, the cells, the brain, for instance, the skin, we did the optic nerve.
I want to return to the topic that I took us away from, so I apologize, which is behavioral protocols. Do you regularly do the cold shower thing, ice baths, cold water swims? Are you into that whole biz?
I don't do them regularly. I do try to sleep cool. I sleep better anyway. I try to dress without a lot of warm clothes. I'm here in a t-shirt. It's middle of summer, but in winter I'll try to wear a t-shirt too.
So you're challenging your system to thermoregulate.
Right. Right. I've got this hypothesis with Ray Cronus. We published what's called the metabolic winter hypothesis, which is a few tens of thousands of years ago, we were either hungry or cold or both, and we rarely experience that now. And so we try to give ourselves the metabolic winter. And part of the problem, I think, with the obesity epidemic is that we're never cold. And cold, when you're cold, you have to burn energy. It may be only slightly, but over the whole night, if you're a little bit cool, you'll actually expend more energy. So I try to do that. But I'm not a big fan of cold showers. The sauna, I don't have access to my gym as much as I did. But I do want to get back into it. I used to do it regularly. I try to compensate with changes in my diet and exercise until I get back into it.
You reminded me of something that I meant to ask earlier, that obesity reduces NAD levels and accelerates aging. How? Is there something direct about white adipose tissue? And the reason I ask this, there are really interesting data now that fat actually gets neural innervation. It's not just stored fuel, it's stored fuel that's acting as an endocrine organ, essentially. So, why would being fat make people age faster?
Don't know, but I'll give you my best answer, which is that obesity comes along with a lot of problems that include a lot of senescent cells in fat. If you stain old fat for senescent cells, it lights up. And when you kill off those cells, at least in mice and maybe in humans, it looks like the fat is less toxic to the body because those senescent cells in their fat are secreting these inflammatory molecules that will accelerate aging, as we now know. You talk about the sirtuins and NAD. So if we just look philosophically at why this would be, the sirtuins only like to come on or get activated when the body is under adversity. And if a cell is surrounded by fat or contains a lot of fat, it's going to think times are good, doesn't need to switch on. So that's the evolutionary argument. Mechanistically, we don't know, but it could have something to do with the response to glucose, which then responds to the sirtuin gene. But that hasn't been worked out very well.
So why is it that having elevated blood sugar, glucose, and insulin ages us more quickly? And or why is it that having periods of time each day or perhaps longer can extend our lifespan?
Let's start with what I think was a big mistake, was the idea that people should never be hungry. We live in a world now where there's at least 3 meals a day. And then we've got companies selling bars and snacks in between. So the feeling of hunger, some people never experience hunger in their whole lives. It's really, really bad for them. It was based, I believe, on the 20th century view that you don't want to stress out the pancreas. And you try to keep insulin levels pretty steady and not have this fluctuation. What we actually found, my colleagues and I, across this field of longevity, is that when you look at, first of all, animals, whether it's a dog or a mouse or a monkey, the ones that live the longest, by far, 30% longer, and stay healthy, are the ones that don't eat all the time. Actually, it was first discovered back in the early 20th century, but people ignored it. And then it was rediscovered in the 1930s. Clive McKay did caloric restriction. He put cellulose in the food of rats so they couldn't get as many calories even though they ate. And those rats lived 30% longer. But then it went away. And then it came back in the 2000s in a big way when a couple of things happened. One is that longevity genes in the body that come on and protect us from aging and disease. The group of genes that I work on are called sirtuins. There's 7 of them. And we showed in 2005 in a science paper that if you have low levels of insulin and another molecule called insulin-like growth factor, those low levels turn on the longevity genes. One of them that's really important is called SIRT1. But by having high levels of insulin all day, being fed means your longevity genes are not switched on. So you're falling apart. Your epigenome, your information that keeps your cells functioning over time just degrades quicker. Your clock is ticking faster by always being fed. The other thing that I think might be happening by always having food around is that it's not allowing the cell to have periods of rest and reestablish the epigenome. And so it also is accelerating in that direction. There's plenty of other reasons as well that are not as profound, such as having low levels of glucose in your body will trigger your major muscles in your brain to become more sensitive to insulin and suck the glucose out of your bloodstream, which is very good. You don't want to have glucose flowing around too much. And that will ward off type 2 diabetes.
Do you think there's anything about the subjective experience of hunger itself that could be beneficial for longevity?
There are some studies that are being done at the National Institutes of Health that are able to simulate the effect of hunger, but still provide the calories. And it's looking like there's a small component that's due to hunger. But most of it actually is because you've got these periods of not being fed, and then the body turns on these defensive genes. There's a really interesting experiment that was published maybe a couple of years ago by Rafael De Cabo down at the NIH. What he did was he took over 10,000 mice and gave them different combinations of fat, carbohydrate, protein, and he was trying to figure out what was the best combination. And then he also cleverly had a group, well, two groups, one that was fed all the time or ate as much as they wanted, and the other group was only given food for an hour a day. And it turns out they ate roughly the same amount of calories because, of course, in an hour, they're stuffing their faces. It turns out it didn't matter what diet he gave them. It was only the group that ate within that window that lived longer and dramatically longer. So my conclusion is, and mice are very similar to us metabolically, I think that tells us that it's not as important what you eat, it's when you eat during the day.
What is the protocol that people can extrapolate from that? Or maybe I should just ask you, what is your protocol for when to eat and when to avoid food? Do you fast? Do you ever fast longer than 24 hours? What do you do? And what do you think is a good jumping off place if people want to explore this as a protocol?
Well, if there's one thing I could say, I would say definitely try to skip a meal a day. That's the best thing.
Does it matter which meal, or are they essentially equivalent?
Well, as long as it's at the end or the beginning of the day, because then you add that to the sleep period where you're hopefully not eating.
I think that's an excellent point. I realize it's a simple one, but I think it's an excellent one because I think one of the things that people struggle with the most is knowing when and how to initiate this so-called intermittent fasting. And the middle of the day obviously is not tacked to the sleep cycle in the same way. So it's much harder as well for many people.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I do. I skip breakfast. I have a tiny bit of yogurt or olive oil because the supplements I have need to be dissolved in it. And then I go throughout the whole day, as I'm doing right now here with this glass of water here. I'm just keeping myself filled with liquids, and so I don't feel hungry. Beware that the first 2 to 3 weeks when you try that, you will feel hungry, and you also have a habit of wanting to chew on something. There's a lot of physical parts to it. But try to make it through the first 3 weeks and do without breakfast or do without dinner, and you'll get through it. And I did that for most of my life, actually. Mainly because I wasn't hungry in the morning. Some people are very hungry in the morning, and they may want to consider skipping dinner instead. But I will go throughout the whole day. I don't get the crashes of the high glucose and the low glucose. That anyone who goes, oh man, it's 3 o'clock, I'm going to need a sleep. If you do what I do, you will not experience that anymore. Because what my body does is it regulates blood sugar levels naturally. My liver is putting out glucose when it needs to, and it's very steady and gives me pure focus throughout the day. And I don't even have to think about lunch. I'm just powering through. At dinner, I love food as much as anybody. So I will eat a regular, pretty healthy meal. I'll try to eat mostly vegetables. I can eat some fish, some shrimp. I rarely will eat a steak. In fact, my microbiome is so adapted to my diet. Now, if I eat a steak, it will not get digested very well. I'll feel terrible. Rarely eat dessert. I gave up dessert and sugar when I turned 40. And occasionally I'll steal a bit of dessert because it doesn't hurt if you steal it, right? But other than that, I avoid sugar, which includes simple carbohydrates, bread I try to avoid. I've actually noticed, this is just a side note, I used to get buildup of plaque pretty easily. And every time I went to the dentist, they'd have to scrape it off. And I even bought tools to scrape it off because it was driving me nuts. I don't get plaque anymore. And I think it's because of my diet. I don't have those sugars in my mouth that the bacteria feed on and then form the biofilm on the teeth.